ESPN Radio, Matt Schick, Trevor Matchfield Gates here on Golick and Wingo, filling in for Golick and Wingo on this Football Friday. Word came out because of Antonio Brown and his use of Instagram and social media.
He's prolific, if nothing else.
He likes to do that. If you ever want to know what's going on in Antonio Brown's life, just log on to one of his Twitter feeds or his Instagram, his social media accounts. He posted that he was with the New Orleans Saints.
Yep.
Leading to the fact that, and it's now being confirmed, that he's working out with the New Orleans Saints. And we talked about it last hour, that it felt like this was more of the Saints playing the long game than, hey, we need him for this playoff run. Meaning, if he signs with the Saints or any NFL team, there's a good chance that he could be on the exempt list for the commissioner's exempt list and not be able to play because the investigation is still going on with Antonio Brown. Suspension likely to come after that investigation is complete. Doesn't appear to be upon completion anytime soon. And so the Saints, it appears, look, we'll see what happens here, but a due diligence seems to be the right phrase.
And by the way, like a really smart play by the Saints, and I mentioned it earlier about this idea. Let's say that the Saints gather a good amount of information today that would make them comfortable with signing Antonio Brown when Antonio Brown is cleared to play football. Then let's fast forward. And I don't know how long a suspension for Antonio Brown will be. Let's just say it's a 6-game suspension. And again, that's putting the cart before the horse. But envision a scenario where he is suspended by the NFL for 6 games. Well, the Saints could be the first team to come to Antonio Brown and say, listen, we understand you got to sit for 6 games. But remember in December of 2019, when the rest of the NFL was ignoring you, and we said, Antonio, we want to figure out what you're all about. Separate and apart from how enticing it would be to catch passes from Drew Brees and opposite of Michael Thomas and play for a team that, no matter what happens this year, I do believe has a chance to be right back in the same position next year. Antonio Brown would also have the memory of the Saints being one of the teams to call when seemingly so many others are basically in the no-fly zone with Antonio Brown.
That would require a bit of loyalty from Antonio Brown. And what's your sense of his degree of loyalty?
Well, certainly, loyalty has a price, right? So if they're not going to buck up.
That's a great point. Loyalty has a price.
Yeah, if they're not going to buck up and pay the big bucks, then certainly it's going to be an issue as well. But I think it's smart by the Saints. I really do. I think it's smart of them to take a look. I would say there's really no harm in this by the Saints, right? I mean, I understand that there are those who believe just teams should be out of the business of Antonio Brown, but there is a difference between taking a look at a player and actually signing a player and putting him on the field.
If they do sign him, even if it is for next year because of suspensions that may continue to run, think of it this way. If he becomes a good enough citizen that doesn't damage the chemistry in the team, if he works hard, if he helps them win, they've got what amounts to a high first-round talent for nothing.
Yeah, and this is a team that could certainly use as many pieces because they're going to have a hard time because of the fact that a couple things. First of all, they don't have their second-round pick next year. They already traded that this past year to the Miami Dolphins. Their first-round pick is going to be a low one, and this is a team that has been unafraid, by the way, to take some chances. They just recently claimed Janoris Jenkins off of waivers from the Giants, who had been waived. And it's a different experience, obviously. Jenkins, 1 year, $1.2 million of salary cap commitments. Antonio Brown's going to cost a whole bunch more than $1.2 million. And also, Antonio Brown's a better player. But Janoris Jenkins had just made himself in the news for all the wrong reasons, right? He had used an unacceptable term on Twitter and basically showed no remorse for that term and chalked it up to just that's how, he was not using it in the connotation that most of us interpreted it to be used in. But still, the Saints are a team that has a locker room and has some infrastructure in place that they're able to roll the dice a bit more than a normal NFL franchise.
But here's the beauty of it. They'll have 8 months to see what kind of person Antonio Brown is or can become.
Yes.
Like, you go from January to August and go, okay, let's see how this goes. I don't believe, though, that the first step of making a good first impression is to post on Instagram that you're working out with the team. Like, it's social media that helped bring your brand down, helped ruin some things in your professional life, and the first thing you're doing is posting on Instagram that you're there with the team. It got deleted. I don't know why it got deleted. Maybe he was told to delete it, but then he posted it again with an ESPN.
He gave the app some notifications, so we're in on that. But he can't help himself with it. He cannot help himself with social media. He is, and maybe he can tell you it's part of his business strategy, but he clearly has an addiction to Instagram stories and social media in general.
Well, think about what he's done, though. Well, in the space of just several weeks, he got himself bounced from the Steelers because he made himself so toxic that they had to get rid of him, and that was intentional. So the Raiders looked at that and said, hey, I want to bite of that. So they sign him, and before he can even play, he becomes so toxic to them intentionally that they bounce him. Then he's signed by the Patriots and becomes so toxic to them for legitimate reasons now that they bounce him.
Yeah.
And so the next team that signs him are thinking, yeah, we can change him. There's a parable of the frog and the scorpion. And the short version is, scorpion comes up to a pond, wants to go across it, can't swim, asks the frog who's about to swim across if he'll let him jump on his back and swim across. Frog says, no, you're a scorpion. When we get halfway across, you're going to sting me and I'm going to die. And scorpion says, I can't do that because then we'll both sink and I'll die too. Frog says, that makes sense, so hop on. So they go across, halfway across the pond, scorpion stings the frog. And as the frog is dying, he looks up at the scorpion and says, why did you do that? Now we will both die. And the scorpion said, I'm a scorpion. That's what I do. Right? Well, at this point, how much does Antonio Brown need to do to prove that he's not that guy that got bounced by 3 teams in the matter of just a few short weeks?
Josina Anderson from ESPN, of course, tweets that she's told Antonio Brown's workout with the Saints scheduled for approximately 10 a.m. Eastern time. So that is about 20 minutes from now, and God willing, they'll have the right size helmet. Golick and Wingo on ESPN Radio, ESPN News. Coming up from a player who's